Right, joining us now is Chukwudi Odoeme, who is a professor of international law at Veritas University and the executive director at Citizens Agenda Nigeria. Thank you for joining us on Newsnight tonight.
My pleasure being here.
Well, 79 years of the United Nations. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to listen to the UN, officials there giving an account of their stewardship as far as it concerns Nigeria. But we'll come back to that. But let's look at the global picture. 79 years. Would you say that the United Nations has lived up to its mandate of peace, universal brotherhood, and all of the different objectives that it was created for in 1945?
Let me say an emphatic yes. The reason why I'm saying that is the matters relating to global peace is the state where it is now because of the intervention of the United Nations. Without them, you would have most conflicts would have escalated more than they are at present. Even
when you have Russia going on, Russia-Ukraine war, the Middle East in turmoil, and all of that, and of course, African countries.
Yes, for the Middle East, that's one conflict that predates the United Nations, and it's one conflict that is rooted in traditions that are beyond the understanding of the present age. Is an ecclesiastical war going on in the present milieu. Then, as it has to do with Ukraine and Russia, one would not expect the UN to do much. I'm sorry I have to say that clearly. The reason is simple. This is a proxy war by the United States against Russia. If you recall that the then USSR, represented by whose rights and responsibilities has been inherited by Russia, had similar base in Cuba, which is just next door neighbor to the United States. So what is going on in Ukraine now is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's a proxy war between the US and Russia. So US is using the pseudo NATO alliance, to find a way of creating a base near Russia. And I'm sure that Russia would not, while it stands on its feet, allow that to happen. That is what is going on in the escalation of the conflict that's going on right now. So initially, the idea was that let's encourage Ukraine to join NATO. Once they join NATO, they were able to equip them militarily and establish military presence there. But I'm sure that Russia would never, particularly with the presence of Vladimir Putin as the president, ever allow that to happen. And I'm not seeing that happen.
Well, in the midst of, I'm happy you started by saying an emphatic yes to that, because, well, it's also debatable. But the evaluation of peacekeeping efforts by the United Nations is something that I want you to also try to give us a sense of how well has that been.
If you look at the Charter of the United Nations exactly, you find out that the Charter stands on two prongs when it has to do with conflict everywhere. The first thing is to attempt to make sure that the conflicts do not escalate, seek peace at all costs. And when that has happened, or when there's a breach of that peace, you can go ahead and mobilize forces to ensure that you maintain the peace, but not to fight the war exactly. Even though there are provisions in the UN Charter that seem to appear to allow the UN to do that, but you remember that UN has no military of its own. So what it does is to call on well-meaning nations to contribute to the military alliances that will be used in interventions here and there. But then this has to have its foundation in the Security Council, in which USSR is, in which China is. And these are countries that do not share the same ideology with the US. So you find it difficult to cook anything that is very useful in that Security Council once it has to do with armed intervention anywhere in the world. If you look at what is happening in our neighborhood, once the U.S. shows interest in one particular thing, Russia comes behind, and China, who has had the policy over the years of non-intervention, is now intervening in these countries, and that is what is leading to crisis in certain parts of Africa in particular.
And you were saying earlier an emphatic yes to the fact that the UN has lived up to its mandate of peace, at least, providing a semblance of it. But would you say that I want to guess you would say yes, the UN is stronger and not necessarily weaker in the face of some of the points that have been raised. And I recall that Israel, take for instance the crisis going on there, and that war between Israel and Hamas. The UN Secretary General has been declared a persona non grata in Israel because as far as Israel is concerned, the UN has not spoken strongly enough against Iran's attack on Israel.
I'll tell you a thing.
Right.
The war between Israel and Hamas and the United Nations interest is something that is it needs further examination. Israel has consistently accused UN of pampering the people who are attacking Israel. And the United Nations Charter, Article 1, Sub 2, gives nations of the world the right to self-determination, to self-defense and self-determination. So Israel cannot sit on its own and allow its neighbors feast on it and do nothing. If you're following critically on what is happening in that region, you see that many staffers of the relief agency in Palestine, for instance, were involved in the October 7 invasion of Israel and the kidnapping of people. And recently in Lebanon also, one of the strongmen in that was caught in Lebanon was a teacher employed by the UN. Right. What's his name? Sinua. Yeah. When he was caught, had I think a teacher's ID on a program that was supported by the UN. In the face of these things, it's very difficult for Israel to sit down and say the UN is doing very well. And then the biggest problem we have in the room is this. Since the invasion of Israel by Palestine or Hamas, as the case may be, many people who are discussing the issues, the conflict in Israel, are not paying attention to there was a confrontation by Hamas first. Right. And what Israel is doing is more like retaliation. Should I use that word, retaliation? Or protecting itself.
Well, this is just debatable. It's not about the conflict there, because before then, there's also been some hit on the people of Palestine just before October 7. But again, quickly now, talking about reforming the UN, which is something that a lot of people would like us to talk about. How do you think reforming the UN, that is if you agree, will help make it better in its peacekeeping efforts and perhaps also a friendly disposition in the hearts and minds of member states?
This is a very tricky question. But let me say that reforming the UN may not be on the table because of foundational issues. UN is a committee of nations who defeated Germany during the Second World War. Yeah. So if you are not at that party, you can't benefit from it. That's the basic problem we have. So all the hue and cry about reforms may necessarily not need to reforms in the UN, like increasing the membership of the Security Council, permanent members of the Security Council. It may not achieve that. I think we should be looking at another supranational organization that will replace
Well, just like African countries seem to be looking the way of BRICS. But before we let you go, we need to wrap really. But has the UN served Africa well, especially Nigeria? Or should we say, how better can the UN serve the interests of Africa?
I would think that UN has done well in Nigeria because most of the interventions going on here, either directly by them or their agencies or those who benefit from them. In terms of what could be done better, the point is that many of these interventions in their implementations do not achieve the objectives, or the implementation are usually by nationals, Nigerian nationals. I think we should, whip up sentiments in the area of anti-corruption to make sure that when these funds come, they achieve the objectives for which they are intended, not necessarily increasing what is happening. UN has a great presence here, and they've been excellent.
Well, Professor Chukwudi Odoeme, a delight having you on Newsnight, and thanks for staying the course all through. Well, we'd like to see you again.